Hey babe, how are you?
Hello, I haven't seen you in a while, like since this morning before I left for work.
I know, it's Friday. And we have a concert tonight in the rain.
Yeah,
Yay. Always
yeah,
in the rain. They're always in the
yeah.
rain. So today I think we're talking about something that you and I have both really had some pretty involved discussions about, right?
Right.
The that supplier meeting, the do's and don'ts of a meeting with a buyer. Certainly, you've been on both sides of the desk, right? As both a buyer and a supplier. I have always just sat on the supplier side of the desk, but also have worked a lot with suppliers who I see come in with, just a horde of uh, people from their headquarters, and anyway, all the things that we'll get into. And so thought maybe we would just talk about that here and share a little bit of your thoughts and your experience. And anecdotally, maybe I'll throw in some of my stuff too.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, because we could talk for weeks about, putting together a good presentation and what makes a good buyer supplier meeting. But, today we just wanted to kind of hit some high points of the do's and don'ts, right?
how many, if you had to guess, if you have to just spitball, how many supplier buyer meetings do you think that you've been in?
Well, actually, right before we started, I tried to do a little bit of back of the napkin math, going through years and trying to figure out. And to the best of my knowledge, if I had to put a number on it, I'd guess around 5,000 over the last 35 years.
I don't think I've done 5,000 of anything in my life.
Yeah, yeah,
5,000.
yeah.
Does the as does wow. That's a couple. That's a couple. Um, so what your roles had to have varied a bit in these, right? What might that have looked like?
Yeah. So, and that's, I think, one of the things that's kind of helped me as I've kind of grown and done a lot of these meetings is I've got to play a lot of different roles in the meetings, right? So, from a junior account manager that was going in maybe with a more senior person that was presenting, or as a senior account manager that I was presenting myself, or as a team leader, like a manager of other people where they were presenting and I was kind of the wingman, all the like on the supplier side.
Mhm.
Then on the supplier or the buyer side, like it's a buyer or a merchant, tons of meetings there. Or as a senior merchant, lots of times you're going in with a merchant or an associate buyer that reported to you. And so in that role, you were kind of a wingman too. And also done some from strategy roles. And it's just kind of cool to see it from different angles. And sometimes when you're not the one presenting or not the one necessarily being mainly presented to is when you kind of pick up the most because you're kind of sitting on the sideline and watching the interaction. So it's just kind of fun to kind of put together all the pieces.
I think I just made a note. Uh, Going in as a senior merchant with a more junior person with you, almost like in a coaching role, right? So
Yeah,
it gives even a bit of a different perspective than as the merchant or maybe as the sales guy coming in and you've got the president of the company, right? And you're trying
right.
to control and manage all of the moving parts of all of the things.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what do you think? We'll do do's and don'ts maybe. Um, let's start with do's. What are some of the big do's that you think
yeah.
that suppliers should focus on?
Yeah, some of the ones that kind of fall on high on the list, and this is not necessarily during the meeting, right? It shows up during the meeting, but the first one I would say is like do your homework. I've been in a lot of some meetings as a buyer where the supplier clearly didn't do their homework. Like they after a while you'd be like, hey, have you ever been in one of our outlets? Have you been in a store?
So
Have you been?
anecdotally, like to
Yeah.
not put you on the spot, but anecdotally, like give me an example. Someone
Well,
comes
for
in.
example, if like at Sam's Club, if a supplier came to you and they said, hey, I'm sure you do a lot of half pallets in your club. Well, if they would have walked the club one time, they've never seen a half pallet, right?
Or pallet
Or
skirts.
hey,
Yeah,
or trying
right.
to sell a shipper in it, right? Like you walk around the club, there's no ship, like so that it was just clear that they didn't do their homework. So it's really important to do as much homework as you can. Now, part of that is walking through, if it's Walmart or Sam's or whoever you're calling on, is just walking the floor, understanding. Some might be calling people that maybe have more experience with that account.
Mhm.
But doing your homework's a big one.
Well, like we talked about last time with Jeremy, right? Walking the
Yeah.
store, just
Hmm.
understanding. I think that is, yeah,
Yeah.
true. A big part of the homework. Um, Probably the knowing the competitive landscape, not necessarily your competitors as the supplier, but maybe your customers,
Yeah. Well, and
right?
as a supplier, you don't expect the supplier to know everything, right? Like about what you're doing and what you're trying to do, but you do expect them to demonstrate that they have made an effort to learn some things up front before they came to talk to you.
Mhm. So homework.
Yeah.
Okay. Got that. What else?
Um, do your best to speak the retailer's language, right? So if they call an assortment change a modular, try to call it a modular. Or if they call it a relay, try to call it a relay. One of the big ones at Sam's Club was suppliers coming in and calling our outlets stores instead of clubs. They
Oh,
used to drive buyers nuts,
I cannot tell you
like,
how many times in
yes,
teaching
it's clubs.
classes, I
Or it's,
would, I would,
yeah,
yeah, no, I would reiterate, like, you want to get a merchant butt sore real quick, call a club store.
yeah,
And I was just recently working with that beauty company who had hired somebody who had come over from club to work on the Walmart side, and she was calling the stores clubs. And I was like,
clubs, kind of hard.
nix
Yeah.
to that.
We're,
Yeah. Mhm.
we're calling you call her a shopper instead of a member or things like that. That's just big. To do your best to speak the retailer's language. And if you don't have a lot of experience with that retailer, again, that kind of goes back to doing your homework. You may have to in advance talk to some people that do,
Mhm.
and get their perspective and get
I've seen it.
their
I've seen a lot of
suggestions.
that, like what sell through, right? Walmart's sell through is not necessarily what um, somebody,
Hmm.
suppliers will think sell through is POS, right? What sells at the
No,
register. And Walmart's looking at sell through as what percentage of the goods that I shipped did you sell, right? So it
yeah.
is it's a little bit of that language stuff too. Anything else there?
And the other one I would say is do your best in advance to kind of know the retailer's focus areas, right? So if their focus area is value and you don't realize that and you go into your presentation, you're talking all about margin improvement, right? Like so you're kind of misaligned. So do your best to learn in advance what those retailers' focus areas are. So they're really focused on value, man. You want to hammer value during your presentation. Or if they are, really their big thing of the day is newness or better for you. Those are the things you want to incorporate into your presentation so you can align as much as possible. Some of that, like I said, if you don't know it yourself, you may have to talk to other people, or there's a lot of data sources out there, things like Cleveland Research or Kantar or Warehouse Club Focus and different publications that kind of do a really good job of kind of summarizing where that retailer's head is at the moment and what the real hot buttons are for
As a merchant, were there certain things that a supplier might ask you that you felt were a positive? For example, if they would ask you about your strategy or ask you about maybe where you were going with a certain line, or if something had been successful before, are there things like that that maybe a supplier might feel comfortable asking and would
them.
be as a positive?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that, there's not many things that a supplier should be reticent to ask, right? Like, I think asking a lot of questions is really important during presentations and about their strategy and what their focus areas and stuff are. It's good if you can know some of those things in advance, at least at the high level at the retailer level, not
Mhm.
necessarily at the category or whatever, but a lot of the other ones you can pick up during the meeting if you ask a lot of questions.
Like I have this widget, and I know you've had a widget like this before. What might be an expected rate of sale would be an okay question.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
All right. So I'm the data person, right? I love an Excel spreadsheet more than probably anybody on the planet. And have been responsible for the data portion of a lot of those meetings. Um, in your opinion, what do you think are some of the do's and maybe don'ts in regards to how data is used in meetings?
Yeah. I mean, I think a big do is using data to make your points. I've been on there a lot of presentations that was really light on data. It was more like, hey, this thing's really cool and taste it and it tastes good. And, but there was no data in it,
Mhm.
right? So I think you definitely need to use data to make your points to really to give yourself some credibility. Um, but don't make that data overly complex. Because you got to think there's sometimes where if sometimes like there's a really cool chart or a table that you can show the buyer, but it's not something that within 15 seconds they can understand, right? Like if they sit there and studied it for 5 minutes, they could probably get the point you're trying to make. But you don't have 5 minutes. You got a half-hour presentation. You can't spend 5 minutes on this or 10 minutes on this chart. So they need to be very pointed. Hey, somebody looks at that chart, you can tell it's saying this. This is the big point to get out of here. A couple of big points.
Sure.
As you're getting ready for the presentation, it's probably a good idea to pull somebody over that real isn't real knowledgeable on your business and stuff and say, hey, show them this chart. Say, hey, do you get what this is saying? And they get what it's saying really quickly. It's very plain. It's to the point. It shows that, for example, this item is huge in the market and it's a gap for you as a retailer, or there's so many things but it just has to be plain. And very easy to understand.
That's one of the things, one of the many things I love about working in the evenings at home is the ability to kind of bounce that kind of stuff off of you, because I like a chart with all of the things on it and I have a hard time taking the things off. And so I know if I have to spend more than a couple of minutes explaining it to you, that it's probably a little too much me in it and maybe not simple enough.
Well, I mean, if you're the one that created it, a lot of times you're the one that you really understand it, and it looks simple to you. But if you step back and you're not as attuned to it, then it takes a while. So, you get a chart that's got 4 different axes on it. It's just tough to kind of do it.
I can't tell you how many
get a little
times.
numb to it. Yeah.
Yeah, there've been a couple of times where you've been like, you're gonna have to give me a minute to study this. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Point taken. Point taken.
And,
So
and the other one's citing data sources, right? So if you're going to use data, cite your source. That's another big one, right?
Can it be grandma? Like,
yeah. Well, it's not so much like you want to use accepted data sources that have credibility. But the worst thing can happen is a buyer asks you, hey, where did that come from? And you don't know, right? And that kind of can make you look bad in a presentation. So it's Nielsen last 4 weeks ending a certain date. That's
a good numbers person will put that as a footnote in a chart.
Exactly. Yes. Cite your data sources.
Yeah. Yeah. Have good people to do that. So there is a lot of data information that deals with competitive retailers. So not necessarily whomever it is that you're calling on. What do you think are some of the best practices in terms of the competitive information?
Yeah, so lots of times you will have suppliers come to you and it's like, hey, I'm on your side. I'm going to give you this competitive information, right? Like I'm going to tell you this thing about this competitor.
Cringe.
And like they're only doing it for you, right? And so that's something that buyers never want to see, because if it's confidential information about another retailer, makes them very uncomfortable to begin with. And the other thing about it is they know that if you're going to share that information with them, you're going to as easily share Walmart information, Sam's Club information, whoever you're calling on, with another competitor. So you don't want to hear it. Like you don't want to hear it at all, and you shut it down as quickly as you can as a buyer. But to me, but on the other hand, there are some things you can share about other retailers, right? If it's public information, like if it's information that you could get by walking into that retailer and just observing, like if that buyer went out in the market and they went into Target, they could clearly see that they carry this item and it sells for $250. You can share that with them. That's fine. But what you don't want to share is, hey, they're going to add the second item and they're going to add it in August and it's going to go into 2,000 stores. Like that's private. You don't share that. So, like I said, anything that's public information that they could gather by just going out and hitting that competitive retailer, yeah, feel free to share that. Anything beyond that, do not share.
We actually run into that at that my real job with One World Sync with the retail and commerce analytics. I've given some pushback before, like some of the stuff that we scrape and we share. I'm like, are we going to get our hands slapped? And
Mhm.
it's public information. It's out there on the internet,
Yeah.
which means it's in a forum for anybody to use. So, probably in addition to the stores, like if it's out there on the World Wide Web, then it's probably okay to share,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and sometimes it's the level of detail that you share. Hey, yes, this other retailer does carry this item and it does well for them. Is one thing. Probably okay. This
Mhm.
other retailer carries this item and it's doing $2,000 per store per week or per week. That's not okay. Like that's a specific information that you gained out of their system or they gave to you that you can't share.
But what they're retailing it for would be okay, right?
But the retailer store is fine.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Where they carry three sizes and these are the sizes. Yeah, that's public. So,
Yeah. Yeah, not unlike we tell our kids, like if somebody's gossiping to you about somebody else, then you can guarantee they're gossiping
yeah,
about you, right?
it's a good way to lose a lot of credibility. Yeah,
Yeah. So there are a lot of personal dynamics in play at these meetings, right? And um, again, another hot topic for me when I'm working with just suppliers and just kind of a give and take kind of situation, but especially when there are multiple attendees, how do you manage that?
yeah. There's a lot going on. One thing I'd say is do try to be personable, right? And it's fine to ask a buyer about their family or their vacation and stuff. But don't push it to the point that like you're assuming that they're your new best friend, right? There's a line there at some point,
But
and
right,
it's
I think that I actually think that's really important though, that I have encountered so many suppliers who don't feel like they can say, "So, how's your wife?" Or,
yeah,
"Hey, you guys had a baby. How's that going? Are you
yeah,
sleeping? Do you even know your first name?"
yeah,
Um, that 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 can kind of be a great icebreaker. They put their pants on one leg at a
yeah,
time, like we do.
yeah,
Because I have seen so many suppliers who go in there that are so buttoned up and they're so tight that
yeah,
like there's no way you're going to build a relationship with that
yeah.
merchant.
There's a
Um,
there's a line there, right? Like, at what point do you start making a buyer uncomfortable because it's too much of a buddy buddy, right? Like,
mhm.
so you kind of figure out what the line, and that line changes the longer you call on a buyer, right?
Mhm.
Like I think you get more latitude in that regard the longer you just have that relationship established.
Which I have a theory that that's one of the reasons that Walmart has moved their merchants so frequently is to keep that relationship from. I mean, it gives a fresh perspective, but I think it also
Yeah,
kind of, and that's just my opinion from the sidelines. But I think about relationships that I've seen built at like Sam's, where merchants tend to stay in a role longer
yeah,
than buyers over at Walmart, and certainly I can see that, right?
yeah,
The
Tom.
longevity,
Well,
at least partially, right?
yeah.
What
And,
else?
and the other dynamic that you're managing a lot of times is there's multiple people from the buying side or the selling side, right? In there. One thing I think it's good to do is to include all the attendees. Like, so if the replenishment person is there, or the DMM is there, or whoever's there, I think you include all those people. Like, especially like when you think about like as you're talking, don't just lock in entirely on one person and never vary. And you've got to make everybody feel included. But your main focus is going to be on the decision, right? One thing you don't want to do, and I've seen this happen a lot, and it's kind of natural, is to gravitate toward the highest ranking person in the room, right? So if your DMM is there, VP, a lot of times I've seen people just focusing on them, right? Or if your SVP is there, SVP on the buyer side is there to lock in on them. Well, a lot of times on that particular item or category, they're not the decision maker. They're the highest ranking person, but they're not the decision maker. Uh, Rochelle, Jill, right? And so this lady, Jill Turner Mitchell, used to be our GMM SVP. And we went into a presentation one time, and I was the buyer, the DMM was there, and Jill was there, and the SVP. And we did introductions, gave out business cards in between us and the supplier. And when the supplier started presenting, they locked in on Jill. They didn't look at anybody else in the room. They were presenting to her, right? And finally, Jill took a break and she said, "Hey, let's stop for a second." She goes, "I gave you a business card when I came in, didn't I?" And the supplier said, "Yeah, you did." She goes, "You might want to look at it again." So they pick it up, they look at it, and she says, "Does this say buyer anywhere on there?" And they said, "No, it doesn't." She said, "That's because I don't buy anything." She goes, "I'm here, I'm interested." But she said, "The person responsible and the person's making the buying decisions over there, so you may want to talk to them."
Mhm.
Right. So,
And
anyway,
how fortunate for that supplier, right?
yeah, yeah,
I think too, you mentioned the replenishment manager. Um, and again, it depends on why you're there
yeah,
and how long, and there are so many factors, but there have been a lot of instances where um, engaging that replenishment manager, especially if you have really good metrics or
yeah,
have a good run or you've had some good wins. Maybe your stuff has just really sucked wind, but you've made some really good headwinds, right?
yeah,
Um, Engaging that replenishment manager and getting that positive feedback in front of the merchant.
yeah,
I think a lot of suppliers don't realize that when line reviews come around, the replenishment manager gets a voice. Like
yeah,
if the
absolutely.
supplier's not, you know, pulling their weight, then the replenishment manager can make or break somebody too. So I think
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
yeah. I mean, like I said, include everybody, but where you're mainly focused, but make sure everybody feels
Okay, so
it.
anything else?
Yeah, one thing is the thing is you want to strive for a conversation. That is easier with some buyers than others, right? So a conversation, asking a lot of questions, getting usually the more you can get a buyer to talk in a meeting, usually the better that meeting goes. At least of what I've seen, right? Unless they're yelling at you or something, but talking, having a
Have you
conversation.
yelled? Have you ever yelled?
Yeah.
Have you ever
So
yelled? No, wait, no, I really need to know this. Have you ever yelled?
have I ever yelled? No,
No. Damn
no,
it.
not at
Okay.
me. But but like I said, you want it to be conversational in nature, right? And I think what happens a lot of times is you rehearse for your presentation and you've got all these things in your head you want to say, and you've got a half an hour, and you basically bam, 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 bam. And lots of times in these presentations I've sat in, lots of times I've been kind of a little bit on the sidelines, you can kind of see in those meetings the buyer like is wanting to engage, like they want to respond, they want to engage, but the person that's making the presentation doesn't give them any space to do so, right? And so
Mhm.
you miss out on a lot of points that you could have gotten from the buyer and a lot of feedback you could have gotten from the buyer, just by pushing through a presentation.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I think I've been to several meetings where we never even got to what we were really wanting to talk about and
yeah,
just kind of left it with the buyer. And of course, anymore, we don't even print anything, right? We just give them a file digitally. But
yeah,
a lot of my stuff, a lot of my pretty charts always go to the index because there's just not going to be time to go through them,
hmm,
right?
yeah.
Um,
It doesn't always go, and you've got a way of a flow that you kind of expect the meeting to go, but it doesn't always go that way. And sometimes you shift gears, right? And you go in a different direction because that's kind of where the conversation takes you. But
mhm.
anyway,
Um, okay, so lots of do's. Um, Tell me, I, I kind of have the cliff notes on this one and have a host of my own answers, but what would be some of the just don't do it. Just don't.
I think one that was always a pet peeve for me is when a supplier would incessantly name drop, like drop names. Even when I was at Sam's, they drop names from Walmart, like high up executives they know or whatever. Like, okay, I don't even really know who you're talking about, right? But and even when I did, it was just like you've named 12 different names in the first 8 minutes of our presentation. Like, stop with the name drop. I get it. You know some people, right?
Mhm.
So that was one that was always big with me.
But
Um,
if they have a good relationship with your counter, with that merchant's
yeah,
counterpart at Walmart,
yes,
it would be okay to say, hey, we've worked real closely with this human being
yes,
and like certainly reach out to them if want to get some feedback on our metrics or
yeah.
whatever. That would be okay, right?
Yes, it's
Okay.
degrees, right? sometimes it felt like people were throwing out a bunch of big names to almost influence you because, hey, I know these people, so therefore you should buy whatever I'm selling.
Mr. Biggs is my best friend. Yeah.
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 Um, one that's a big one is coming with a lot more content than you can ever cover in the amount of time you've got in that presentation, right? Like coming with an hour's worth of content for a half-hour meeting, right? And leaving no time for that conversation and talking. So it's really good to try to tailor your content to the amount of time you've got.
So Rochelle's stuff goes in the index. Yes, I hear you.
No, not if it's those good data points, man. Sometimes you include those. Do have a hook, right? Sometimes you'd have suppliers come to you with an item and say, "Hey, I think this will do as well as what you've got." Well, am I going to go through the pain of throwing a supplier out, bringing you in, managing a transition, all this stuff because maybe it'll do as good as what I've got, right? Figure out what your hook is. Is it better quality? Is it a better margin? Is it a better value for the member, for the customer or the member? Just make sure you have a hook. And as you think through, especially new items and stuff you're presenting, think about what that hook is, right? So highly incremental, or it's what, but you got to kind of point that hook out in the meeting.
I think we could have a whole conversation on that, just that. Like,
Yeah.
what are some things look,
Yeah.
I'll make a note. Yeah, we should do that. What are some things what are some hooks to look for? Because
Yeah.
I like my item because I said so. Like I tell the kids because I said so. That's why.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah.
What else you got?
Yeah. One is sometimes when you have suppliers that they act like they control retails. And that's a really big one with buyers. Will set them off really quickly, right? Well, you need to retail this for this. Okay. You go back and say, hey, you realize you control cost, I control retail. Like, so if you want to control retail, then I'll switch over here and I'll decide on cost, right? Like, so that's always a big one. Now you can make meaningful suggestions on what you think they should retail it for and say, hey, I know you want to be this kind of value to this other channel or this other retailer. If you retail around here, that should hit you about right. Realizing you control retail, that's just a suggestion. It's almost the way you handle it, but buyers will go off pretty quick if a supplier acts like they control retail.
Oh, I can't tell you how many sell sheets I've seen that have cost, retail, margin. Well,
Yeah.
okay, but what about if it were would you ever present it in such a way as, hey, like items on the shelf look like they retail around this, and that would could put you at a margin of around that. Like, would that be okay?
Yeah, I think it's fine when you say, hey, I'll put some thought to it, and based on these factors, I think this is probably about where you're going. I'm not telling you what to retail it for, right? I'm giving you suggestions based on what I know about you as a retailer, but it's up to you.
That makes me back to things that we can ask the buyer. Would you ever ask the buyer, or would it be acceptable to ask the buyer about margin goals?
The only thing that worried me the most when suppliers would ask me that is that if I said, hey, I would like, generally I'll make about a 14% off margin or whatever it is, that they would just use that to back into what cost. Like, you want to drive the best cost you can, right? And sometimes if they know kind of what your margin goal is, they can kind of back into a cost, and that may not necessarily be.
So maybe it's okay after you've presented your cost, right? When you're having that discussion, that, hey, this is, where it felt like the retail might shake out. Does that fall within your margin goals? Something like that, maybe.
Yeah. And it's a hard, because, and two, here's the other thing is if you say 14%, then that's the high water mark. Like everything you see from that point on will be 14%. And what a lot of retail or a lot of suppliers don't realize is if you think, okay, that's a blended margin across your category. All the big dog items are probably already there, like your big staple items. And generally those are ones that you probably do make a less margin. But you drive a lot more volume, and in total you make profit dollars, right? Whereas if you're a fringe item and you're just going in, and you're probably going to be in the bottom third of sales as far as items for that category, then there may be more pressure to make margin on that, right? Like I'm not selling a ton of this, so I probably need to make a better margin, have a better value, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So,
blended margin, probably another topic worth discussion.
yeah,
Yeah, when I was managing
uh,
Blink Media, we had, the big obscene, I know these margins are obscene to you, but our everyday margin items were 30-40%. And then our ancillary accessory items they were upwards of 50 and 60%
yep,
margin, right? But when you blended it all out, at the end of the day, we came in around 40, 45
yeah,
points of margin, right? We the category, not we the supplier.
yeah,
But yeah, blended margin's another
yeah.
concept. Okay, what about map pricing?
Well,
Map.
I have never worked in a lot of categories where a map came into play. To tell you the truth,
Mhm.
that's not one that I've got a lot of experience with.
What my I've done a little bit of electronics. My limited experience would say that and it's probably mostly in electronics, that at the end of the day, still it's up to the buyer, right? Even if there is map pricing, like the buyer can go against it. And then, I guess the option is for the supplier to just not ship it, right? That there's not, it's price fixing, right? So that it's not a set in stone price, right?
Yep.
But they like to, I think that's just another way of saying, hey, this is like shoving a retail down a buyer's
Yeah.
throat, right?
Yep.
What else you got?
One thing I would say is, as far as they don't, is just don't kind of come and vomit your entire product catalog on fire, right? And I'm not saying that you can't leave a product catalog at the end of a presentation. Say, hey, here's basically everything we do. But the thing is, you do want to come with suggestions and say, hey, based on what we're seeing from you and you're seeing your set and stuff, here are 3 items or 5 items we think would have the best chance for success, right? Like I'm not just throwing everything we can make at. I'm telling you, hey, I'm narrowing it down for you a little bit and say, hey, based on what we know, these will be some of the best things. Now, we also do these other things, and if you're interested in that area, then we can do that. But at least we've been thoughtful in coming to you with suggestions.
So don't throw everything hoping something sticks,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
The buyer's already
Uh,
overwhelmed, like a kid in a candy store, right?
yeah, it's true. I mean, it's true, and it almost feels like you kind of haven't done your work, like you haven't thought through it, and you haven't. I mean, and lots of times too, you may show them something, and maybe it's a 6-pack, and they say, "Well, I kind of like that idea, but 6-pack's going to be too big." But at least you're giving them a place to start. You're
Mhm.
kind of boiling down a little bit.
Mhm.
And the last one that I had on here was one that's kind of in that homework piece, but is do anticipate questions and requests. Like if you're going in and you're showing the retailer a 14-ounce item, as you're thinking through it, you're looking through your presentation. Well, what if they want a 16-ounce? What if they want a 10-ounce? What if they want, instead of a multi-pack, they want to do a big bag of something or a big box? So anything that you basically you can almost have, go through the presentation, have somebody act as the buyer, right? And what are some pushbacks that they may have or some requests that they may have? And then what you can do is kind of vet those requests through your organization, and that, hey, I'm showing them a 14, but if they want a 12 or a 10, yes, we can make that. There may be some cost implications, but we can make. So, and then when the buyer hits them with that, then hits you with that, then you already have at least somewhat of a response already for them right then. The other thing that it does, if you can do that, it also helps you establish credibility, right? Like that it feels like more like you're the decision maker. Now, in advance, you ran that through your whole organization, but you don't talk to them about that, right? Like they just kind of see you as, hey, I asked them for this, and they said right away that they could do it. They get back to me with the costing, that kind of thing. So as much things as you can anticipate in advance of the meeting and get answers to, or at least partial answers to, the better.
Because if the decision maker's not in the room, the buyer asks for something, then it's a get back to you and it's an email, because buyers
Yes.
don't give their phone numbers out anymore. And then it's just a chase the thing. Okay. Something we've not talked about that I think is worth touching on. Who goes to the meeting?
Who goes to the meeting? That is a good one. I think that depends on the focus of the meeting, what you're trying to get done. If it's a meeting where you're addressing a bunch of problems, is it a meeting that you're talking about supply issues? So if your meeting is about supply issues, right, you want to include your replenishment person. You may want to include people from logistics or supply. If it's an annual negotiation, you may want to include your manager, your team lead or your VP. It varies a lot. And the one thing I would say on that too is I think there's also a lot of value in at least having a number of your meetings during the year with the buyer be just you and the buyer. Or I mean, you don't control their side, but at least just you. Because I think sometimes there's a level of honesty and almost like
Intimacy. Yeah.
familiarity with just a one-on-one, right? Because if your boss is in a room, lots of times you're going to have to strike a certain posture or you're going to have to act a certain way. I think sometimes there's a more of an authenticity sometimes when it's just the buyer and the supplier. But other than that, I think it's just based on the type of meeting that you're having. It dictates who you'd want to bring with you.
I worked for an account manager once who said that if that human didn't have a role in the meeting, then they didn't go to the meeting.
Yeah.
But there's so many suppliers, especially when you get into the smaller suppliers, where the president of the company wants to be a face and wants to be they want their finger in the pie. And I would think as a merchant that you walk into a meeting thinking you're just going to have a quick little something one-off with your account manager, and there's 6 people sitting across the table from you. Like I mean, it has to be at least a little intimidating or off-putting.
Yeah, a little bit. It just feels like sometimes, I mean, I've been in meetings with suppliers where it was me and there was 8 or 10 of them, right? And I always joke and
And
say,
everybody wears
hey,
name tags.
well, it's funny. I'd always joke with them and say, hey, I think you're still outmanned. I think you need to go back and get some more people. Just as a joke. but
Hold on, let me get some people from in the hallway to help. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, sometimes it gets a little bit overwhelming, and you kind of understand sometimes too. And they do this on the supplier side too. Sometimes you bring in people for learning experiences. A lot of times you'll see buyers bring in their mentees, people they're mentoring into meetings just to learn. But you're right. Sometimes it gets a little bit overwhelming when you see a supplier bring in a dozen people.
Or there had been instances I've seen where a supplier would take in a subject matter expert to help them build credibility where they didn't already have that, right? So taking in somebody who was really good at replenishment because they were a relatively new supplier, and the replenishment manager was going to be in the meeting. And so it made sense to have that person there because they speak the same language, and maybe helps establish some credibility for the supplier, right?
The one thing I try to make sure of is no matter who you're bringing to the meeting as a supplier, if you're the main person in charge of that meeting, is that the people that you're bringing in know like what the script of the meeting is, what your purpose is. Because the worst thing that can happen is you bring somebody in the meeting and they take the meeting far afield of where you wanted to go with it. And
one of my biggest pet peeves is when they spend the first 15 minutes doing introductions and they talk about what they've done their whole entire career and basically their LinkedIn profile. Like we don't care.
Yeah.
But nobody cares.
Yeah.
Like, let's just talk about the stuff, right? Fast forward.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes even if it's a senior person, you kind of got to establish to them, hey, you're still a wingman here. I know you outrank me, but in this meeting, you're the wingman. So don't take this in a lot of directions that I don't want it to go. I know where it needs to go, right? So follow along with me. You can chime in and stuff, but don't take it off path. But,
and I wish them the best of luck. I think there would be some suppliers or some account managers where that would be a pretty hard.
It is
a hard battle to fight.
It is. It really is.
Yeah. I'm sure there is so much more that we can talk about. I think we've talked on all of the points that we had planned to, and I threw a couple, not curveballs in there, but just a couple of things that just kind of came to mind as we were talking. Is there anything else here outside of those things that I think that we want to come back and revisit?
I think there's some that deserve revisiting and drilling down on. I know we've talked about, if you're doing something on data that's appropriate for meetings, so like how to serve up data and things like that. I think that would be a good one. I think these were some of the biggest ones I thought through, as far as the do's and don'ts, right, that really stand out.
I would love, yeah. Anecdotally, I think that anybody watching, I would love to hear kind of, I'd love to hear the stories of what other people experience, right?
Yeah.
And maybe like how do I do this thing? Like I have this meeting come up, what do I do? How do I handle this? I think
Hmm.
I certainly always welcome that. As much as I welcome an icy on your way home.
Got it. I will
Okay.
stop.
All
All
right.
right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for the time.